Well, thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to be able to visit with you again. And welcome to the program, Kings of the Nile. We appreciate your presence here and hope that you will subscribe to our program. Today we have Professor Ted Vestal, a retired professor from Oklahoma State University, who has done a lot of work with Ethiopia. He's done a lot of work over many, many years, and I'll let him tell you more about that. But Ted, thank you very much, first of all, for coming. We appreciate you and all the love and the respect and love that you have for Ethiopia, spending majority of your life studying Ethiopia. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you,
Ted.
Mel, my friend. It's so good to be with you.
Nice to see
It's
you
so
too.
very good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. I know that you were director of Peace Corps in Ethiopia in the 1960s. How was your experience there? What was your reflection of the country when you first came down? And I wanted to ask you how that was. And that's now almost 70
It
years.
was a great experience.
And you enjoy, you were there for
Make it 60.
you were there for 2 years, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. A little over 2 years.
Okay.
And it was a wonderful experience. The Peace Corps had its largest group, the largest number of volunteers that it ever had in Ethiopia during the time I was there. So it was a very busy time with wonderful people involved. And I was able to study Amharic and study something about Ethiopia, the country, and traditions before my wife and family and I got to Ethiopia in May of 1964. So we were fortunate to study Amharic with Tedessa Biene, who was a graduate student at Georgetown at that time, the Ethiopian Studies program at the University of Haile Selassie I University. So I had an advantage in being able to speak the language a little bit, which many of my Peace Corps colleagues did not have. That gave me an advantage of going out into the countryside and being able to communicate with many different kinds of people. So I got to travel to all of the provinces that existed at that time in Ethiopia, which I assumed everybody did, but found out that that was somewhat of a rare occurrence to have. And I got to visit all of the wonderful religious and secular historical sites of the country. So I traveled to the north and to the south and out to the east to Haror and of the country that many people don't necessarily get to see. And I was able to meet Ethiopians from all walks of life, from headmasters to teachers to lawyers to university people. We had 584 Peace Corps volunteers scattered out all over the country at that time, which was one of the largest projects. In fact, when the second group of Peace Corps teachers came to Ethiopia, we had the largest gathering of Peace Corps volunteers any place in the world for a short while. So that was a unique situation. And I got to be a part of learning about the daily life of Ethiopians, the religions, the culture, and the attitude of the people, the humor, the poetry, all of those things that make Ethiopia great were part of my learning experience. So in answer to your question, my time in Ethiopia was quite wonderful. It shaped many things that I did in later life. And I thank you and your wonderful people for making that possible.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Ted. I understand also that you have been, of course, I've written books about Ethiopia. Can you tell us a little bit about the books that you have done? And I think you've got one last book that is in publication, and you can tell us about that also, that people can get excited about it.
All right. My first major book was Ethiopia, Post-Cold War African State, which was published in 1999. And this was a history of Ethiopia from the fall of the Derg through 1999. Now, the book that's in process of publication is the second edition of that book, Ethiopia, Post-Cold War African State, which continues the narrative from 1999 up until the present time. I stopped in 2020 thinking that there was going to be an election, and I was using 2020 to indicate good sight, not knowing that we were going to have a plague violence with the coronavirus and all the problems involved with that, and all of the ethnic problems that have broken out since that time. So that's coming soon. I finished my writing of that book in May of this year, and I'm waiting for the publisher, Sahai Publishing, to come out with this new edition, which should be soon. A second book was called The Lion of Judah in the New World. It was about Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia and the shaping of Americans' attitude towards Africa. The Emperor Haile Selassie set the record for the number of state visits to the United States. I think Queen Elizabeth has finally caught up with him, but he had 6 state visits to the United States, which is more than any other person, any other ruler ever had. So this book traces the impact of those visits to the United States on American attitudes towards Africa and especially towards Ethiopia. And I enjoyed writing both of those books very much. There's another book that Sahai published that I played an important part in. It's Christopher Clapham's book called Haile Selassie's Government, which stopped in the early 60s, 1960s. And I wrote an afterwards, which brought the emperor's activities up until his overthrow by the Derg. So those are my 3 major works, specifically with Ethiopia. Of course, there were all sorts of articles and presentations at conferences. Wonderful people throughout the world invited me to come and talk about Ethiopia and what I knew about the emperor and about the Peace Corps and about the country itself. So I've been fortunate to be published by some very knowledgeable people. The Ethiopia Review and the early magazines that came out in the 1990s were wonderful sources for information. I did a lot of writing for them at that time. So those were my primary writings about Ethiopia.
Yeah, nice. Thank you very much, Ted. And I wanted to ask you, how did you get involved into being asked to come to attend, be an observer for the first election of the many fake elections that TPLF held? When was it that you were there with 2 of your colleagues? I don't know who it was, but you had 2 people that went with you, 2 volunteers from Oklahoma.
Right. I was actually in Ethiopia under a program sponsored by the U.S. Information Agency, which was a foreign scholar specialist program. So I was there serving as the equivalent of counsel to a legislative committee. And after I had accepted that invitation, the African American Institute, which was the sponsoring body for the international election observers, got in contact with me and asked if I would like to be an international observer as well. I said, yes, I'll already be there, so it'll be very easy for me to switch over and help you with your projects too. And I think the TPLF made a mistake in thinking that the observers they were asking for were going to be people who knew very little about Ethiopia. They sent a very knowledgeable, the African American Institute sent a very knowledgeable group of people. So people like Donald Levine, the professor dean from the University of Chicago, and I were out together many times. I was observing also with Laverle Berry, who was with the Library of Congress and wrote the wonderful Library of Congress handbook on Ethiopia. I was with Conrad Evans, the Point Four man who spent 12 years in Ethiopia teaching in and around Alamaya and the agricultural programs there. So this was a very knowledgeable group of people. And they wrote a less than glowing report of what was going on in the election at that time. And it was for that reason that there was some controversy with the TPLF and the findings of the international election observers. But it was a great group of people, and I think they accomplished a good deal by questioning the validity of what was going on in some of the situations. The TPLF was very intent on the mechanics of an election. How many people got lined up at the voting booth, and did they know how to mark their ballots? It was kind of mechanical questions, but very little interest was expressed in what was going on behind the scenes. Were people able to run for office? Were they able to campaign in a proper way? So those were the types of questions that the international election observers were asking. And needless to say, the government did not like some of the responses to that. I was fortunate a short time after I got back from that experience that I was asked to testify before a congressional committee. And to my knowledge, I think I was the first person to, first American to testify to some of the problems that were coming up under the TPLF government. And I couldn't believe the response that I had in terms of Ethiopians from all walks of life who were in Washington, D.C. at that time. This was 1994, coming up and saying, thank you for giving an honest answer to that question. It's the first time that's happened. And that really began my very serious writing and working in Ethiopia in the academy. So that led to all the things I've done since then. My first connection with Ethiopia officially was 1962 when I went for an interview with Sergeant Shriver in the Peace Corps. So I've been reading and thinking about Ethiopia for a long time. I suppose that qualifies me for Shemagalehood. So I'm a Shemagale now, and it's meant a lot to me to be able to keep
Yes,
at it this long. I'm
nice.
appreciative of having the opportunity.
Thank you, Ted. You have been involved also helping many Ethiopians in the U.S. who were subsequently chased out of Ethiopia, whether it was by Derg, the military junta government, or the TPLF. How was that experience, and how many people do you recall that you've been able to testify for to help them in their asylum seeking process?
Right. One of my colleagues at Oklahoma State University, where I was teaching, an Ethiopian gentleman, asked if I could do an expert witness affidavit for him. And I said, what is that? And he explained to me, you needed someone knowledgeable about the country and the politics of the country to write an analysis that would be useful to the court in deciding whether that person would have a problem if he were to be returned to his home country. So I wrote that first one and suddenly was besieged by letters from people all over the United States, lawyers and Ethiopians seeking political asylum. So I ended up writing 125 political asylum expert witness affidavits or Ethiopians from all walks of life. At that time, many of them were fleeing from the TPLF. They were people who had outstanding careers back in Ethiopia, and they were literally forced out of the country. So I was pleased to be able to help them and to testify and write these expert witness affidavits, which are sort of like little master's theses. Each one was aimed at a particular person. The patterns were quite often the same. People from the security forces of the TPLF would come knocking at the door at midnight, and forcing people out of bed and taking them off on dreamed up charges and imprisoning them or beating them up physically. So I was glad to help the intellectuals and the people getting away from those abuses of human rights back in Ethiopia at that time. So that was a significant part of my resume in terms of working with Ethiopians in the United States.
On behalf of all the Ethiopians that you have helped over the years, I really thank you very much. And a friend like you is always a friend in need. We Ethiopians will never forget what you have done for us. And I know a lot of people in Oklahoma and even in other parts of the United States that are really owing it to you and so grateful. Even here in Denver, we're saying that you are the one who helped them to get their asylum paper in order, and thank you for that. And now fast forward to the current situation. What do you think is the cause of the current conflict that's going on in Ethiopia right now?
The cause, as best I can tell, is the TPLF not wanting to give up its power. They ruled for approximately 30 years and with an iron hand. And all of a sudden, there's a reformist movement that comes to power. And the new regime is doing things right from my perspective in terms of not abusing human rights, of not encouraging ethnic conflict, and of providing free speech and meaningful elections. I thought Ethiopia was headed in the right direction and doing very well. And then all of a sudden, we have these ethnic disturbances coming up, complicated by the plague, the viruses hitting Ethiopia at the same time. So I think the TPLF, the Marxist-Leninists, bear in mind that these are the people who were the Marxist-Leninist League of Tigray. And some of them have never given up on that idea of having a homeland of their own with all of the problems that would entail. So I think we're seeing a continuation of the unfortunate circumstances that the country had to labor under. I was very critical of that government for the past 30 years or so. And I think the country is reaping the harvest of that unfortunate interlude. So I was very encouraged by the Prime Minister getting the Nobel Peace Prize. And I thought 2020 was going to be a wonderful year for Ethiopia and for all of us. Little did we know.
Yes.
So I think that's the heart of the matter.
Yeah. So in this conflict, we want to make sure that people are not hurt and the maximum precaution and care is taken so that people in Tigray or elsewhere in Ethiopia, the losses are going to be at a minimum. What do you think is the federal government doing in Ethiopia to protect the civilians anywhere in Ethiopia during this conflict?
It's hard to say from here, but without doubt, their primary aim is the military. The TPLF leaders, of course, they had much of the military hardware soldiers trained. They still have veterans left over from the fight against the Derg. So they have lots of targets of opportunity. The people themselves have never been the enemy. The people uh, have to exist in their setting with the leadership around them. But I think the government of Ethiopia has no intent of trying to purposefully hurt civilians. And it's unfortunate in war and those kinds of situations, people are going to get hurt. But I don't think that's intentional at all. That's collateral damage, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you very much, Ted. How do you see the country moving forward? I mean, 5 to 10 years with all the freedom and the freedom speech. As I told you, I just came back from Ethiopia. People are able to speak, say whatever you want. Other than Tigray, everybody is basically really can say whatever they like and have any kinds of meetings and anything you want, including calling the prime minister all kinds of names. So where do you think is Ethiopia headed within the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I hope there can be a solution to the ethnic problems that have popped up. And if there is, I think there's a very bright future for the country. Uh, Two things I think are happening that are important. One is the finishing up the Renaissance Dam and all of that wonderful electric power that would make Ethiopia a center of electricity and progress that would come from that. Great change from how it was
Yes.
back in 1964 when I first went to Ethiopia in terms of electricity. And then being able to uh, put to use that very large population. You've got uh, more Ethiopians than Germans or Frenchmen or Brits or what have you. And these people are industrious, intelligent, hardworking. And if they can master the technologies that are coming out now, and I think Ethiopia can become a great center for economic development. And if they could get along with the Egyptians, think of the possibilities there of two very large populous areas with all the modern activities that are possible when people put their minds to things. And Ethiopians themselves need to realize that the country has been at its best when everyone gets on the same boat. So that the Battle of Adwa is just one example of what happens when the Ethiopians get together and put their minds to something. That there's literally nothing they can't do if they will put away their uh, disturbances within their internal community and get on with what they were intended to be, which I think is the chosen people is not a bad title. That would be quite appropriate for Ethiopians.
Thank you, Ted. One final question is, what advice would you have for so many young people in Ethiopia that are really excited about technology? They're excited about changing their lives and trying to stay away from addiction and trying to be more serious about life and get away from eating, chewing leaves and smoking and drinking and things like that TPLF was promoting very highly in Ethiopia. What is your advice for the young people in Ethiopia? And secondly, what do you advise also this young people that are working in the government, including the prime minister? They're young people, and so
Right.
they need a lot of shumagile advice.
Well, but my advice to the young people would be to continue with as much education as you can. The situation is so much better than it was not many years ago in terms of having access to education. For Ethiopian people and the Ethiopian government, make sure that the schools are operating well. Take care of things like women's education that it was neglected in the past. Make sure the women are included in the educational process, and have as much technology as possible as a part of growing up, so that people in schools can learn to use computers, can learn to use all the technological advantages that are now before them. And for the government, I would say continue with what you were doing before the interruption. In my books, things were going very well. The planning for the future looked good. And I would say to rally behind the prime minister and his party, his new party, and work on a greater Ethiopia. Do away with these fightings, internal fightings and ethnic fightings, because you have such great potential to become one of the world's great countries, one of Africa's greatest countries, if you just put your minds together to it. So I would encourage you to get on with it, and may you all live to be Shamagiles.
Thank you. Thank you, Ted. I really appreciate your time. I'm sure this is not our last time we'll be talking, as things are progressing so fast in Ethiopia. I'll come back and knock on your door if you don't mind.
I would be honored.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you, Mel.
Have a pleasant day.
Thank you. Amasagalolo.